I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "You left her alone?" My voice shook with barely restrained fury. The sterile white walls of the hospital room blurred as my pulse pounded in my ears. My 10-year-old daughter alone, abandoned by the very people who claimed to love her. "Oh, calm down, Tina," Gerald scoffed, his voice thick with condescension. "She's old enough. She needs to toughen up." My breath came in ragged gasps. "She's 10, Gerald. That is illegal. That is neglect. Get back to my house. Now." "We're already halfway to Matthew's," Patricia added breezily. She didn't want to come. That was her choice. A choice? Isabel, who still woke up screaming from nightmares, fearing she'd lose me like she lost her father? This wasn't a choice. This was cruelty, disguised as indifference. "I swear to God, if anything happens to her—" "You're being dramatic," Patricia cut in, voice dripping with irritation. "William would have understood. You're making her soft." They used his name, my dead husband's name, as if he'd ever excuse this. As if the man who adored his daughter, who read her bedtime stories in silly voices and rocked her to sleep after bad dreams, would ever stand for this. "This conversation is over, Taum," I said, ice-cold clarity washing over me. "You will never have unsupervised access to my daughter again." I hung up before they could argue, my fingers shaking as I dialed the only person I trusted right now. "Monica, please check on Isabel." "I'm already grabbing my keys," she said without hesitation. Relief cracked through the rage, but only for a second. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Lying in that hospital bed, I could still hear Isabel's voice in my head, small and terrified. "Mommy, they left me." A deep, bone-deep certainty settled into my chest. They wanted me helpless, dependent, vulnerable. But they'd just made a fatal mistake, because now I saw them clearly. They had underestimated me for the last time. Patricia and Gerald thought they were untouchable, but they forgot who they were dealing with. I wasn't some naive college girl anymore, desperate for their approval. I was a mother, and they had just declared war on the one thing I'd burn the world down to protect. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was revenge. I had trusted them. That was my first mistake. Lying in my hospital bed, stitches fresh from surgery, I replayed Patricia's words from 3 days ago. "We may have our differences, but we're here when it counts." And like a fool, I believed her. I let my guard down, convinced that maybe, just maybe, they could put their egos aside for Isabel, that they would finally step up for their granddaughter when it mattered most. But today, they had proven exactly who they were. The phone vibrated in my hand. "Monica," I answered before the first ring finished. "I'm with Isabel now," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with anger. "She's upset, but she's safe. I brought her to my place. She's having cookies with my son." A wave of relief hit me so hard I almost cried. "Monica, I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me." Her voice was firm, sharp. "Tina, what they did, that wasn't a lapse in judgment. That was child abandonment." I hesitated. "They're her grandparents, William's parents, and they left a grieving, anxious 10-year-old alone in a house for a party." Monica cut me off. "You had emergency surgery. What if you'd had complications? What if Isabel had gotten hurt? What if someone broke in?" The what-ifs punched the breath from my lungs. A fire, an accident, a stranger knocking at the door. Isabel, alone, scared, thinking I had left her too. My hands trembled as I reached for the nurse call button, then stopped. Number I knew what needed to be done. That evening I made the call to Child Protective Services. The social worker's voice was gentle but firm as she took my statement. This isn't just a family dispute, she said. It's neglect under state law. There will be an investigation. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Gerald. What the hell, Tina? His voice was pure rage. Some government agency just called saying they need to interview us about Isabel. What did you tell them? I didn't flinch. The truth. That you abandoned my daughter to go to a party while I was in the hospital. It was a family gathering, not some wild party, and she was perfectly safe. I sat up, ignoring the pull of stitches. She was terrified, Gerald. She has nightmares about losing me, and you left her. This is ridiculous, he bellowed. We're her grandparents. We have rights. And that's when something in me snapped. Rights? My voice was calm, deadly. You don't have rights. You have responsibilities, and you abandon them, just like you abandoned Isabel. Silence. Then, his next pathetic attempt at guilt. Patricia's in tears over this. After everything we've done for you, I laughed, bitter and sharp. Everything you've done for me? Since William died, all you've done is criticize, undermine, and treat my daughter like an afterthought. My voice didn't shake now. It was steel. I'll be home tomorrow, and I don't want either of you anywhere near my house. You can't keep us from seeing Isabel. Watch me. I hung up. For the first time in years, I had the final word. That night, my hospital room felt cold, empty. Doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Had I gone too far? Then I remembered Isabel's voice on the phone. Small, shaking. Mommy, they left me. And just like that, the doubt vanished. They weren't the ones who needed protecting anymore. I didn't overreact, if anything. I had let them get away with too much for too long. By the time the hospital discharged me the next morning, my resolve had hardened into steel. Monica picked me up, filling me in on Isabel's night as we drove home. She had trouble sleeping, she said softly. Kept asking if you were really coming home today. My grip tightened on the seat belt. Did she say anything else? Monica hesitated. She mentioned this wasn't the first time. My stomach lurched. What do you mean? Monica glanced at me. Yesterday, they went grocery shopping and left her alone for about an hour. Told her not to bother you while you were recovering. I saw red. Twice. They had abandoned my daughter twice and made her believe she had to stay silent. The second I walked through Monica's front door, Isabel crashed into me, her little body trembling. Mommy, you're back, she sobbed. Pain lanced through my stitches, but I held her tight. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm so sorry they did this to you. Later that afternoon, once we were home, I changed the codes on our electronic locks. I called a locksmith to change the physical ones, too. Isabel sat curled on the couch, watching me warily. Are Grandma and Grandpa coming back? She asked. I knelt beside her, choosing my words carefully. Not for a while, honey. What they did was wrong and dangerous. She swallowed hard. Grandpa said Daddy wouldn't be proud of me for being so scared. Rage burned through me like wildfire. Your daddy would be so proud of you, Isabel. You were brave to call me. That was exactly the right thing to do. By evening, my phone was a war zone. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from Gerald, Patricia, and even William's brother, Matthew. I let them all pile up until Matthew's name flashed on the screen for the third time. I answered. Tina, you need to calm down, he started. Mom and Dad are beside themselves. They said you reported them to CPS and changed the locks. They abandoned my daughter, twice. My voice was ice. They left a 10-year-old alone so they could go to your birthday party. Look, they made a mistake. I scoffed. A mistake is forgetting to pick someone up from soccer practice. This was a choice, a selfish, reckless choice. Their family, Tina, Isabel's grandparents. Would you leave your kids alone at that age? Silence. That's what I thought, I continued. They're not welcome in my home until they acknowledge what they did and take real steps to earn back my trust. After I hung up, my voicemail showed 3 messages from Patricia, each more venomous than the last. Tina, this is absurd. Gerald and I have never done anything but love Isabel. You're poisoning her against us. William would be horrified by your behavior. And the final, laced with cold fury. We're speaking to a lawyer about grandparents' rights. You can't keep us from seeing her. You've gone too far this time. I deleted them all. They wanted a fight. They just lost before it even started. I knew their threat about grandparents' rights wasn't just bluster. They had money, connections, and a lifetime of manipulating narratives in their favor. But what they didn't have, the truth, and I had receipts. That night, as I tucked Isabel into bed, she blinked up at me with teary eyes. Am I in trouble with Grandma and Grandpa? The weight of everything pressed against my chest. No, sweetheart, I whispered, smoothing her hair. They're the ones who made a bad choice, not you, and you're safe now. But as I kissed her forehead, I knew none of us were truly safe from what was coming next. By morning, the fight had officially begun. An email from Child Protective Services confirmed an open investigation. The caseworker, Ms. Bennett, scheduled a home visit that afternoon. Attached was a list of resources about child safety and family counseling, as if I needed more proof that what Gerald and Patricia did was beyond reckless. Then, as I walked Isabel to the bus stop, my phone rang. Patricia. I declined, but a text followed immediately. We're coming over at noon to talk. This has gone far enough. My blood ran cold. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed my response. Do not come to my house. If you show up uninvited, I will call the police. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, you wouldn't dare. Try me. After Isabel's bus pulled away, I made another call, this time to the police non-emergency line. The officer listened carefully, and when I mentioned the CPS case, his tone sharpened. We'll send a patrol car by around noon. If they cause trouble, don't engage. Let us handle it. At exactly 11:55 a.m., Gerald's SUV rumbled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched them march up to my door, Patricia's face set in determination, Gerald's already twisted with fury. The moment they reached for the spare key under the mat and realized it didn't work, Patricia started hammering the doorbell while Gerald pounded his fists against the wood. I didn't open it. Instead, I spoke through my video doorbell. I told you not to come. Leave my property. This is ridiculous, Gerald roared at the camera. We have a right to see our granddaughter. Your granddaughter is at school, and you have no right to be here after I explicitly told you to leave. The police have been notified. Right on cue, a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. An officer stepped out, calm and authoritative, intercepting them at my front steps. I watched through the window as Gerald's face turned an alarming shade of red, gesturing wildly at my house. Patricia clutched her pearls of victimhood, undoubtedly spinning some woe-is-me nonsense. The officer listened, then gestured toward their SUV. 2 minutes later, they stormed off, glaring at my front door like I had personally betrayed them. A soft knock followed. Ms. Hayes? The officer's voice was steady. They're gone now. Would you like to make a formal statement? I let him in, explaining everything. The abandonment, the CPS case, their disregard for my warnings. He took notes, nodded, and then paused thoughtfully. If this continues, I'd recommend filing for a restraining order. By the time he left, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. My incision ached, a painful reminder that I should be recovering, not dealing with this mess. I hadn't even taken my pain meds yet. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Natalie, Matthew's wife. "Tina, what is going on? Mom and Dad just called Matthew in tears saying the police escorted them away from your house." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Natalie, they showed up uninvited after I told them not to. The police asked them to leave, nothing more." "Don't you think you're taking this too far?" Her voice softened. "They made a mistake, but a mistake?" My voice was cold steel. "Would you leave your 10-year-old alone while you went to a party?" Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "No, but then don't ask me to accept what you wouldn't tolerate for your own kids." After I hung up, I made the mistake of checking Facebook. My notifications were blowing up. Patricia had posted a long, self-pitying rant, dripping with fake sorrow. "It breaks our hearts to be kept from our precious granddaughter. We are being falsely accused of neglect when all we've ever done is love her. Family should never turn against family." She'd tagged half the extended family, and the comments were already rolling in. Some were sympathetic, but not all. "Wait, did you really leave Isabel alone while Tina was in the hospital?" That doesn't sound right. A slow, satisfied smile curled at my lips. "Oh, Patricia, you just played yourself." The cracks in their story were widening. "Weren't you at Matthew's party that night? Was Isabel there too?" The comments kept coming, skepticism creeping in, unraveling the perfect narrative Patricia had spun. They were losing control. 3 days later, Miss Bennett from CPS sat across from me in my living room, flipping through her notes. The air was thick with anticipation. "Based on our investigation so far, there's sufficient evidence to support your claim of child neglect," she said, matter-of-factly. "Your daughter confirmed she was left alone twice. Your in-laws admitted to it, though they insist it wasn't for long, and that she was perfectly safe." I exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration tightening in my chest. "What happens now?" Ms. Bennett studied me carefully. "This doesn't rise to criminal charges, but it will remain on record. If any future incidents occur, this will support further action." She hesitated. "Have you considered family counseling? If you intend to allow them back in Isabel's life, boundaries will need to be established." If. That single word held more weight than ever. "I'm not sure I do. Not in the same way. Not with the same blind trust." When she left, I checked my email and felt my stomach drop. Subject: Representation for Gerald and Patricia Miller. Grandparent visitation rights. My hands trembled as I opened it. They had hired a lawyer. The letter was all legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were coming for Isabel, claiming a close and meaningful relationship, accusing me of alienating them without just cause. Without just cause? I was still recovering from surgery, still feeling the phantom ache of my body's betrayal that night. And they had chosen a party over my daughter. I forwarded the email to my friend Meredith, an attorney, barely able to type. She called within minutes. "Tina, first, don't panic," she said firmly. "Second, they are overplaying their hand. Grandparents' rights cases are extremely difficult to win, especially with an active CPS investigation." My breath hitched. How can they twist this around so completely? How can they act like they're the victims? Meredith's voice was calm, steady. "People who refuse to take responsibility will always flip the narrative. But the facts are on your side, Tina. That night, as Isabel and I ate dinner, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. Matthew, alone. I hesitated before opening the door. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. I let him in, my eyes never leaving Isabel as she picked at her food. Matthew sat stiffly on the couch, his expression troubled. "I spoke with Natalie's sister," he began. "She's a child psychologist. She said what Mom and Dad did was completely inappropriate and potentially traumatic for Isabel." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to believe they would do something so irresponsible." I studied him. "I didn't either," I admitted. "That's why I trusted them." His jaw tightened. "I had no idea Isabel was alone that night." I froze. "What?" He shook his head, his voice heavy. "Mom and Dad told everyone at the party that you had arranged other care for her. That's why she wasn't with them. They had lied to the entire family, not just to me, but to everyone." Matthew glanced toward Isabel, his face lined with regret. "May I speak with her? I'd like to apologize." I nodded, watching as he knelt beside her chair, speaking softly. At first she was wary, but then she nodded, answering him, her small shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. As he stood to leave, he met my eyes, his voice firm. "I told them to drop the legal threats. Natalie and I won't support them if they go through with this." A pause. "William wouldn't have stood for this, and neither should we." When I closed the door behind him, something unexpected settled in my chest. Lightness. The war wasn't over, but the alliance I had feared was crumbling, not because of me, but because the truth was finally winning. Patricia's text arrived late that night. "We need to talk. No lawyers." I stared at the screen, knowing exactly what this was, the next phase of the battle. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. A week later, I sat in my living room, facing Gerald and Patricia across the coffee table. Meredith, my attorney friend, was beside me. Their lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, a stiff, unsmiling man, sat next to them. Between us, the final agreement lay on the table, a physical manifestation of every battle we had fought. Patricia hadn't made eye contact since walking in, her face pinched with barely concealed resentment. Gerald looked older, deflated. The arrogance that once fueled him had been chipped away. Meredith's voice was calm but firm. "Let's go over the terms one final time." She glanced at Caldwell, who gave a tight nod. The Millers acknowledged their lapse in judgment in leaving Isabel unattended. They agreed to complete 6 sessions of a grandparenting education program and 3 family therapy sessions before resuming any unsupervised visits. Caldwell cleared his throat. "In return, Miss Hayes will dismiss the CPS complaint and allow supervised visitation, 2 hours, twice a month, at neutral locations." I let the words settle. "This isn't about punishment," I said, meeting their eyes. "It's about making sure nothing like this ever happens again." Gerald exhaled sharply. "We still think this whole thing was blown out of proportion, but—" He hesitated, finally relenting. "We'll sign." As they scrawled their names across the document, I felt no triumph, just relief. The war was over. Now, real work had to begin. After they left, I found Isabel curled up on her bed, clutching the framed photo of William she kept on her nightstand. Her voice was small. "Are Grandma and Grandpa still mad at me?" I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms. "No, sweetheart. They were never mad at you. They were wrong, and now we're all working to fix things." She hesitated. "Will I see them again?" "Yes, but with new rules to make sure you always feel safe and respected." 3 months later, I sat on a park bench, watching Isabel teach Gerald how to use her new tablet. Patricia, for once, actually listened as Isabel explained her favorite game. Matthew and Natalie's sons laughed on the swings nearby, calling for her to join them. Therapy had been brutal. At first, Gerald and Patricia had been defensive, but the therapist stripped away their excuses, forcing them to face the damage they had caused. The grandparenting classes hit even harder. During our last session, Patricia finally cracked. We raised our boys in the 80s, expecting toughness, not emotions. Her voice wavered. But the world is different now. Children are different. We needed to be different too. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Old patterns still threatened to surface. But progress? It was real. My phone buzzed. "Monica, how's it going?" I smiled, watching Isabel giggle at something Gerald said. Better than expected. I had built a fortress of support around Isabel, not just Gerald and Patricia, but Monica, Matthew, Natalie, Meredith, and others I truly trusted. This wasn't the victory I had once imagined. It wasn't revenge. It was better, because I hadn't just protected my daughter. I had transformed what was broken into something stronger.